All right. So we've talked a lot about sort of conceptual foundations of testing, right? We've talked about the different kinds of testing. We've talked about why tests are important. Um, and then we talked about some of the challenges of writing front end end-to-end tests. And we talked a little bit about the idea of a headless browser or a browser that is controlled by some JavaScript code. Um, and we actually saw a simple example of that with Puppeteer, but now we're going to actually use Cypress to write and run React end-to-end tests. And we're going to start out just by testing our Vite Hello World app. And depending on time, we might start to add in some more features that we write tests for. So we're going to cover installing Cypress. We're going to cover setting up a Cypress config file, updating package.json. We're going to see Cypress has its own user interface, and we're going to write a couple Cypress tests and sort of explore the Cypress AI, the Cypress API, excuse me, not AI. And let me just go ahead and let's go to the Cypress homepage real quick and talk about what Cypress is. So, Rick, you brought up a good point. If we go to the Cypress website and we look at it, we see this pricing option here, and it talks about browser testing for modern teams, and it sure looks like a product that we have to pay for. And while we do for more advanced features, mostly around integrating with other tools, and Cypress sort of offers a cloud for stuff to run in. We actually can use the Cypress open source library, and we don't even need to worry about running our Cypress tests in the Cypress cloud. We're going to actually run everything locally. And so that's what we're going to walk through here now. And I just need to exit the full screen view here because Cypress is going to pop up some other windows as we get into it. So bear with me for just 1 minute. And I think we'll give ourselves a little less real estate. I think that should do it about so. So installing Cypress is pretty straightforward. I do need to be in an NPM project. And again, I've just made a empty React project here with Vite that we've come to know and love with the main.jsx. And I'll go ahead and remove this strict mode stuff that we don't need. And main.jsx, really mounting app.jsx on the DOM. And we haven't done much here yet. We might add some components and stuff later, but this is our basic project structure. And you can see that on the command line. I'm in the project root directory and we see the package.json for our project here, right? And this is from when I installed Puppeteer to demo it before. You don't need Puppeteer. You don't need to directly install Puppeteer to install Cypress. All we need to do is install Cypress. And we're going to tell NPM that Cypress is a developer tool, that we don't need to install it in a production environment, but we do in a local dev environment. And so Cypress is going to get added here to our dev dependencies in just a second. And Cypress will also create a couple other things for us, and then we'll kind of like walk through what it does and the Cypress config file. And actually, while this is installing, why don't we jump ahead just a bit? Tom, yes, sir.
Just to confirm, you'd want to do this after you've already established your Vite project, not as part of like a combo install thing, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And now it looks like Cypress is done installing. And we can actually run this command npx Cypress open. And npx is a command used to run sort of npm modules from the command line. And we're actually going to move beyond this command very quickly. But we can see that a couple things are happening here. Um, Says looks like your first time using Cypress, it's verifying Cypress, opening Cypress, it's listening, and in fact, on my other monitor window, it popped up this message here. What's new in Cypress? And it looks like version 15 just came out. So that'll be interesting to see if there's any big changes there. Uh, I'll read this later. It's always good to read major version changes. We see there's some changes about AI that we're not going to turn on right now, but that's interesting. Um, if we look at the change log for version 15, they in fact give us a very full, comprehensive breakdown. Um, Breaking changes is the part that you want to pay attention to. Um, while there's a number of smaller breaking changes, I'm not sure if there's anything major. If we run into a big problem, we'll come back here. We'll look at the version 15 migration guide. So I'll just kind of leave this open. So we're not going to worry about component testing today. We're really going to focus on end-to-end testing. So I would click on end-to-end testing, and Cypress now has gone ahead and created some configuration files for me. A Cypress config file, a support file for end-to-end tests, a support file for commands, and some examples. And now it's asking me to choose a browser, and I have a couple options here. Most of us are going to want to choose Chrome. If you are running Windows and WSL, you may have to choose Chromium, which is sort of an open source version. I would maybe start with Chrome and see if it works, and if it doesn't, go to Chromium, which is an open source version of Chrome. No one should be choosing Electron, which is a tool for building desktop apps using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Slack is actually built in Electron. So I'm going to click on Chrome and do start end-to-end testing in Chrome. And we see a whole bunch of things happening here. And while it's doing all this, in fact, let me kind of put this off to the side. So Cypress has gone ahead and it's created some config files for us. It created this Cypress config file that we'll walk through in just a minute. And then over here, we also see in this Cypress directory it created, and there's a couple things in here. A commands file for making custom commands that we're not going to really worry about. An end-to-end support file that imports those commands. And again, we don't really have to worry about this either. And a fixtures file. And fixture is a name for dummy data or fake data. We're not going to use this a ton, but this is where I could put some fake data if I wanted to. But what we really need to do is start writing some tests so we can kind of see Cypress in action. And also, I need to make sure that I have my Vite dev server running to run tests. And I actually don't think I do at the moment. So we'll come back to that in just a minute. But let's do a little bit of sort of quality of life cleanup here. So first thing is I actually want to be able to run my Cypress code from a package.json script for consistency and to make certain things easier. So here under scripts, we're going to add a new script up, and this we can ignore. Cypress quit unexpectedly. This is in fact probably from me killing it on the command line. So once I've installed Cypress, I actually can go ahead and add a couple scripts. We're going to add sci open, and this colon here is sort of a convention for when you have multiple script commands related to one thing. And this will actually open Cypress. And then to actually run Cypress, we'll have this sci run command. And this is going to be very similar to what we just ran on the command line with npx. So we'll see in a minute open is what we can use to kind of run tests interactively with the browser. And then with run, we can actually flag a specific test that we want to run. And whenever I'm using Cypress, I do also have to have my dev server running because Cypress is going to actually talk to my web app. So if I don't have my web app running, then Cypress can't really do anything. And so now if I use this script, npm run open, let's see here. Oh, and I just need to navigate into the directory where my project is and where the package.json is. And now if I do npm run open, we see Cypress open again. End-to-end tests are already configured from the first time I did this. So the first time you guys run Cypress, it'll say not configured, and then you'll click on end-to-end and it'll create the Cypress config and those other files. And again, I click on end-to-end, I choose the browser I want, and we hit start end-to-end testing. And now, in fact, now that I have my Vite dev server running, Cypress opened yet another window. And I can see here in Chrome, Cypress is like running a whole application here for me. And we can see that it's telling me to create my first spec for my first test. We actually don't have any tests in here yet. Cypress Cloud, all this stuff we don't need to worry about. We're not going to use it. We're not going to really use this debug stuff either. We're not going to really have to mess with project settings here much either. And it looks like I may have, there we go. And I'm just going to hit scaffold example specs, and this is going to create some example tests and an example website. And in fact, Cypress is now telling us everything that it's added. It's added a bunch of getting started examples and some advanced testing examples. So it's added a whole bunch of stuff. And if I look here in my project structure, I see here under end-to-end, there's a directory for getting started. And this file is todo.cy.js. And so Cypress actually has written tests for an example to-do app. And in fact, we can see the to-do app if we go to the Cypress website. And so this is a React app or something very similar that the Cypress team wrote. And then these tests will actually run against that to-do app. And we'll look more at these in a minute. I think it is good to create these examples when you're getting started with Cypress, just so that you can have them to look at and reference. And I want to talk through a little bit more of the configuration stuff, and then we'll look at some of these example tests. And we see here our more advanced tests as well. So before we start looking at these tests, and I am going to go ahead and kill Cypress for the moment, let's look at the Cypress config file. So you guys will start to see config files like this more and more. And we can ignore this as well. Sorry about that. What we have here is from Cypress, we import this function called define config, and we pass it this JavaScript object that takes all these different properties. And this configures Cypress for us, is the different properties that we put here. And then we're exporting this, and then Cypress uses this. And there's all sorts of settings that we can change. We could say set a default like load time, where if it stops after a certain amount of time, we fill that out. We can, in fact, set the default size of the browser window, whether headless and actually showing it on the screen, or excuse me, headless and not showing it on the screen, or actually rendering it on the screen that we see. And that's actually a good one to add. So let's add this to our config. So not here under end to end, but below it, we're going to add viewport height. And let's maybe just do, let's bump it up a bit. We'll do 768 pixels and viewport width will be 1024. And if we kind of just keep exploring these options, we see there's a bunch of different things. If I go here, in fact, in the docs in the config, there's a whole article that breaks down the configuration. This one we are going to update, and this one's pretty important. So this is the URL that Cypress will talk to run to all its tests, right? So this needs to be my browser. So over here in end to end, we are going to go ahead and add this. The setup node event listeners might be a newer thing. I'm actually not sure what that does, but we'll leave it for now. So let's set our base URL. And this is going to be our Vite dev server. Right? So I now have to make sure that when I'm running my Vite dev server with npm run dev, you know, that if for any reason the URL that the dev server is running on changes, I would need to change this base URL setting in my Cypress tests. And what this does is we'll see when we start writing tests, we can use side.visit to go to a certain page. So if I say, hey, go visit my page, then we're going to go to HTTP localhost 5173. Excuse me, / my page. Right. So this saves us some work as we're writing our Cypress stuff. And as we look through all these different options, we see there's an awful lot of configuration options for timeout, for folders, for all these other things, screenshots and videos. So this one is kind of important, both of these settings. And so by default, Cypress will record a video of clicking through stuff. This can take up a lot of memory and we don't really need it by default. So we're going to disable recording videos. And similarly, we're going to disable what Cypress calls a support file. Right. And this is where that sort of command file or some other files that might do various kinds of setup where these would get run before our tests. And we don't really need this to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and disable this. And those are the main configuration changes that we need to make to our Cypress config. And now we should be good to go. So before we move on to writing our first test in Cypress, I just want to pause and see if folks have questions or stuff that we're curious about. Rick, yes, sir.
Yeah, it's probably good to disable this stuff, but wouldn't most of the stuff be disabled by default, like the video and the support file and all that kind of stuff?
It is not disabled by default, though.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, that's just the way that Cypress has decided to set up the library, for better or for worse. A lot of the times videos are useful, but for us it's going to be overkill. All right, let's look at writing our first Cypress test. And just to kind of recap the setup here, in the Cypress config that got created, we added a base URL for our React app. We set our viewport size. We were since the default is to record videos, we're telling Cypress not to record videos, and we're telling Cypress not to use the support file. And I've got my Vite dev server running, right, which I will need when I'm writing Cypress code, which I will need rather when I'm running the tests. So let me go ahead here and just quickly look at my guide code to make sure I'm on the right path here. And let's go ahead and let's create our first test. So we're going to make our tests here in the end-to-end directory, and you can kind of organize it however you want in terms of directory structure. Just to keep it simple, I'm going to do 0 my tests to indicate that this is different from the example tests. And then I'm also going to file, and let's just say hello world, right? If I was testing something more specific, I would put the file name there. The important thing is I need to say .cy for Cypress to find this .js. And now that I've done this, I can use this function describe that is going to be a container for multiple tests. So let's start just by testing that these elements that we expect to see here exist. And this will also help introduce us to Cypress. And this describe block takes in 2 arguments. One is text that's the description of what these different tests that we're about to write are. And the other is an arrow function. And then inside the describe block, we write the actual individual tests, right? So the describe block is sort of is an organizer. It's like a container for tests. And then the it block is the test itself. And the syntax is like it should have a title. So I might just say it should have a title. And what I want to do is I want to visit the homepage, and then I want to check that the H1 title is correct. So to do this, I do sci.visit, and I can just say slash because we've set the base URL. So this will go to localhost port 5173. And now I need to write a sort of a selector to grab that title. And I'm actually going to use the elements inspector to look at it, make sure it's an H1. Indeed it is. So let's do sci.get, and we'll take a look at this in just a minute. H1, and you can chain different methods on here as a part of this assertion library that we're using. And I can say should, and this should function does a lot of different things in Cypress. And we'll break it down in just a minute, and we'll say should contain v plus react. And so this is going to be my first Cypress test. And let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. And then we'll kind of walk through each line and what it's doing. So I'm going to use my npm script that I wrote, npm run sci open, and we'll run this test interactively. And we see the Cypress UI that we're beginning to know and love. And we see that the Cypress project takes up the whole space. There's all these different spec files. let me go ahead and click on my test that I just created. And it happened very quickly. But what Cypress has actually done here is it's opened up in Chrome that it is driving or controlling for us. And it's gone to this URL, right? It's visited the homepage. It's gotten the H1 and it asserts that these things are equal. And we see this green check mark and we see that our test is passing. Right? And here I can like control the screen size, and this is looks like it's something AI related that we don't need to worry about right now. And we can see all the other Cypress tests here as well. And just for fun, let's change this so that my test will fail, just so we can see what a failure looks like. And we see that Cypress has hot reloading going on. So it sees when a Cypress test changes. And now we see that this test fails because we visited the homepage, we got the H1, but in the assertion that expects it to contain this text, well, the actual app doesn't have all these exclamation marks, right? And we see an assertion error. It says timeout, but most importantly, expected this to contain this. And so I can kind of use, by clicking through these tests interactively, I can kind of use the actual UI and looking at that and the test error message to kind of see what's gone wrong. And most of the time, that's how you'll kind of debug if a Cypress test isn't working, right? The stack trace is less useful. It's usually going to be, we're going to have to carefully kind of read what we're expecting there to be versus what there actually is. Right. And let's, in fact, just for fun, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 exclamation points. So just for fun, let's go here and let's, in fact, just modify our code to have those 4 exclamation points. Note that Cypress does not rerun itself. I have to rerun the test again. So if I click on the test here interactively, or give me a moment here to, there it is, it's hiding from me, the run all tests circle or the R command, and that will run all the tests in this file. And now we see that the test is passing. So I just want to pause here and see what questions folks have or what we might be curious about with Cypress. Tom, yes, sir.
So when we make our test assertion for should, the first value in this case we used contain, it's a string. So do they utilize keywords? Can that be anything? How strict is that? Like with
Yeah.
like pie testing and stuff, like it was very strict about what you could and couldn't use, but here
Yeah.
it's just a string. So
Yeah. Great question. It absolutely is strict because this is sort of a magic string. I just can't put anything in here that I want. This is the way that Cypress has chosen to write its assertion library. And let's actually break these down. I'll kind of start at the top here and go through the Cypress docs as we look at it. Because that's a very good point. And should is probably, I find it a little frustrating because it's so powerful and flexible. So, and the place to go, by the way, in docs, as we start to really get into them more, is they often call it the API reference, or here it's under references. And if we look under, say, assertions, we'll see, let me go to assertions. We'll see that Cypress is actually using a different library called chai under the hood for these assertions, like should. And in fact, we might have to go look at chai in just a minute. With Cypress, also their search is actually pretty useful, and I do recommend using it to kind of search through each commands. And to kind of walk through what's happening here, this object cy, when I run Cypress from the command line, the Cypress library will create this for me. And this is sort of a container for all of these different functions as we can see. Right. And so all of these different methods that we're seeing here go off of, are used off of that sci object. And so visit is pretty straightforward, right? If we set a base URL, visit will use that. We could give it a full on URL. Here, if we don't give it a full URL, it works off of the base URL. But if I do give it like HTTP colon blah 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 blah, then it will use the full URL. With the base URL, this might cause us problems, in fact. So we usually don't want to do this. You can even get more specific about the different kind of methods you want to use if you wanted to do a post request or something like that. Right, so that's our first command here, is to visit the home page. Next is sci.get. So let's look that one up. And what this one is doing is it's grabbing one or more DOM elements, right, by some sort of selector, which is this syntax that we've seen for getting elements, or if I had an ID, or if I had a class name, or if I had an element of a certain class name. So it's this sort of CSS selector syntax that we see in a lot of different places. And I may have forgotten, in fact, the little arrow to indicate inside. I apologize. But we can see here an example of this selector is looking inside something, probably a div that has the class name list, and then it's looking for a list element inside of it. And it actually returns a DOM element. So normally we do chaining, what's called method chaining, like this. But we actually can like assign it to a variable and check on it. Like if I wanted to, I could do, and let me actually comment this line out. And let's do h1 dot should contain v plus react. And now if we go to our Cypress, and it's a little confusing because I now have two instances of Chrome open because Cypress has opened one, and I rerun this test. Our test is still working, right? So if I didn't want to do method chaining, I could do it on two separate lines, but you usually see stuff method chained, so it is worth kind of getting used to. And then finally, we come to the should operator, which is the one that gets a little trickier. Right, and so this is what's called an assertion that's comparing two things in some sort of way to see if we get a true or false value or if they match. We can see that there's all sorts of stuff we can do with should. So this is circling back to your question, Tom. The should is pretty powerful, and to be honest, I think it can be a bit tricky to get used to. Right, there should be empty, b dot empty, b dot visible, should equal, EQ is short for equal. And I believe we're using this chai library by default. So there's not really a shortcut to just going to the chai library, and we're going to have to go to either the guide or the sort of the docs and go to should. And And I think these are what they call, yeah. So I think they call these language chains. Um, let's see if we can find a better version of a breakdown of the should assertion. So I have to admit, I get a little confused here. But I think what's happening is while if I'm using chai by itself, if we look at an example, I can do like 2 dot equal, 2 dot not dot equal, and so on. When we're using this with Cypress, that's what they want us to put into this should string, like b dot empty or b dot equal or should contain. So I'll see if I can find, there's got to be a better guide on it somewhere that I can share with folks. That said, I think what is useful is looking at the examples that get generated by Cypress. Because if we look through their sort of getting started examples, we see a lot of examples of the different options, like have dot length, have text. Here's have length 3, there's have text again. We'll talk about like contains and parent in a bit. And it looks like there's a bunch of operators that we can put on here. But it does get a little deep, I'm not gonna lie. So in a lot of ways, I think using these examples that it's generated are a good starting point. And using examples in the Cypress docs are probably the next best starting point. And if I can, I'll find a better, I'll see if there's like a clearer guide, but I'm pretty sure what's happening here is they're taking the like this sort of like method chaining of expect and should that we see here from chai, and they're kind of sticking it as strings inside this should. So I hope that helps break it down at least a little bit. Yeah, I think that's a good question. The Cypress docs, by the way, do a pretty good job of like if you kind of look through all of these options. Let's see, do they have parent? They do a pretty good job of breaking down like most of these methods. Like here we can see parent in action. And then if I kind of look at the main menu for the docs, if we go to, is it under API? If we kind of read through their end-to-end testing docs and so both like your first test and testing the app have a number of good examples, but then also down here in guides is where they have some good examples as well. So for example, here's an example of where we're testing if something different is happening based on the class of a button. And we can see they have to do a little bit of method chaining here. So as you start to get more advanced, I think their examples actually are pretty useful. Tony, yes, sir.
So I get that should is kind of a complex thing, but is there like a should not? Or should everything be based on what is?
Yeah, most things I think are going to be should. Um, let me actually check here under the assertions, because I think we're going to see that it's going to tell us to use like should not equal. Yep, and indeed we see should and then not dot equal. So again, what's really happening here is they're taking all this stuff from chai that normally I could write like, X uh, foo dot, you know, not dot equal hello. But now with Cypress, I kind of have to do foo dot should not dot equal hello. Um, but again, they do list out like some of the most common ones here, which I think is useful. So this is a good starting point as well for the should assertions, like be true, not be true, be false. So I don't think there's a good way of getting around the should, but they at least have the most common stuff laid out here. Cool. Um, let's see. Do folks have any other questions before we take a break? Rick, yes, sir.
This is more a question for this coming weekend. So, understanding the Cypress, what will our test cases be this weekend? Will it be Cypress?
Yes, it's going to be Cypress, and it's going to be things like this, like checking that an H1 on a page contains a message. You guys will have different pages, so it will visit different pages to check that the right content shows up. And after the break, what we'll do is we'll build out clicking on this button and checking the count. And it'll include things like that, like actually clicking on different like sort of bits of interactivity. But it'll also be pretty well spec'd out because you'll have a README spec doc as well as a test file.
I guess follow-up question. It may be like, you know, a non-issue, but when I was messing around with uh, Tailwind this past weekend, I don't know if Tailwind will be included in the test specs, but messing with Tailwind this past weekend, from what I could tell, a lot has actually changed between the third or what is it, version 3 and version 4. So will they include Tailwind, and if they do, is it updated to take into account the changes in version 4?
That's a good question. Tailwind usage, I believe, is optional. All of our Cypress automated tests, if they're looking for CSS classes, are going to be looking for CSS classes that we're going to explicitly ask you to create, in addition to however much you guys do or don't use Tailwind or Bootstrap. So they'll be independent. Yeah, good question. All right, guys. Good deal. Let's take 5. We're kind of reaching the tail end here, no pun intended. But when we come back, we'll see how to write just a couple more tests for interactivity, for finding a button, for clicking on it, and we might throw in a little more features on here to see some tests for that as well. All right, guys, thank you very much, and I'll see you all in 5 minutes. All right. So we are going to write a couple more selectors, tests really, to test that we have each of these. Then we're going to see how to click on the count button and increment it. And then if we have time, I think we might try hitting the Poke API and grabbing some Pokemon and writing tests for that. Before doing that, I do want to circle back to the good question you guys have about, hey, there's a lot of stuff happening here with should. Where can I find a good guide for that? I did a little poking. There is a cheat sheet I found. But to be honest, I don't even think it has as much as what's on the actual Cypress docs page. So I think the best cheat sheet is actually going to be this link, which I'll drop in our Zoom chat, and I'll post in Slack later. But again, can be found if you search for if you search for should. We'll see syntax, usage, some examples. And my apologies. It looks like the cheat sheet is actually if I search for assertions. And then under here, we sort of see this cheat sheet. And again, where all this is coming from is it's coming from this other library, Chai, where you can sort of chain these different JavaScript functions together. But the way that Cypress has us doing it is where we have to put in sort of this string name. So not dot equal, and so on. I think the expect would work as well, and we can actually. I think the challenge with the expect is just getting the Cypress element, and so should actually works. I think will work a bit better there. But let's write a couple more of these and see this in action. So what I want to do is I want to check for this first href tag, and I want to make sure it's there. I want to make sure the link is good, and I want to make sure it has an image element. So I'm actually going to write a couple things here in this test. So it should have a clickable V logo. And because this is an independent test, I need to do side.visit again to go to the home page. And now I need to do side.get, and I'm going to get this A tag. And I want to check the value of its href element. So there's a couple different ways I can do this. I can do a little method chaining here. We should have an attribute href, and that href element should equal, and let's paste in https beat.js.dev. And I'm going to rewrite this just a bit to make it a little bit easier to read. And I'm going to put these different methods on different lines. And you'll often see method chaining stuff written this way. And let's go to our Cypress test. And let's run it and see what happens. And if I rerun all the tests, and we'll give Cypress a minute to do its thing. Let's see here. Cypress test was stopped while running this command. I wonder if something.
You had a typo for HTTPS.
Oh, let's see here. I did. That should not cause it to stop though. I may just need to restart some of these things. Let me make sure my dev server is running. It is. Let's see if Cypress. Oh, there we go. So that actually was causing the issue. So now I should have two tests. There we go. Should have a title. We visit the homepage. We get the H1. We assert. It should have a clickable V logo. We visit the homepage. We get the A element, and we assert that it has a value. And so far, so good. Right, now let's check for the clickable React logo. If I hop over to my app, we see that for the second href, it's react.dev. So let's just copy this. And there's still a little more work to be done here, right? I'm not actually checking that the image element renders, and I'll worry about that in just a minute. But let's go ahead and write this code to check that we have the href with the React logo. And now when I run my Cypress tests, we actually see an error. And if we look at the error, we see expected vjs.dev to equal react.dev, right? And this isn't for my first test. This is for my second test. And the issue that I'm running into here is that I have two different href or link elements in here. And if we kind of open up this inspector and let's see if it lets us click in there. Yep, there we go. Right. So the problem I'm running into is I have two hrefs, I have two a tags, and I'm not telling my second test that I want to grab the second one. So the way I can solve this is here in the test. This is actually, if we have more than one a element, there's actually a sort of list of them. And I could grab the first, I could grab the last, or I could grab a specific one. And in fact, maybe what I'll do over here is just to make this one more specific, I'll say first. And so now we are grabbing second item in array. And now this test, fingers crossed, should pass. And indeed, we see that test passing. Right. And if I wanted to add on to these a bit, you know, we check the link exists and has the right URL. But on my homepage, I also have that image asset. So let's try grabbing that image asset. And we would do something like side.get. And here we probably need to do inside that image element, we're going to grab a link. Or excuse me, I keep kind of mangling my words here, but inside this a tag, we're going to grab the image element. And I know that I want to get, there's going to be two of these, so I want to grab the first one. And let's grab it this way this time. And I want to do dot should have attribute, and the image should have an attribute source. And that source element should equal slash v.svg. And let's run that test and see how we do. And so here in Cypress now, if I kind of navigate back to all my tests, and I think I need to rename the tests because they have the same name, but we see here the one searching for the clickable Vite logo. It checks for the href. It then grabs the first image element that's inside an href, and it's checking the logo value, and we're good to go. Now, maybe I should break these into two separate tests. It's a little bit of dealer's choice. And now I can just copy this same code here, and we're going to put this here as well. And I don't want to get the first image element. I want to get the second. And it's not going to be a Vite image asset, but it's going to be in /source/assets/react.svg. So I need to change this to source/assets/react.svg. And now my Cypress tests should be passing. And hopefully also I've now updated the names. And so now we've got our clickable React logo. And in fact, we could even test clicking on this, and I think we should do that in just a minute. Though actually, I think what we'll do is we'll test clicking with the button and the counter. So the last thing I want to point out here is that I have a little bit of duplicate code. I have this side.visit here, and I have it here. And if I had more tests, it would keep popping up, right? And in fact, I need it here. So this describe block lets us write a function called before each. And here I can, inside this arrow function, put a command to run before every test inside this describe block. So I'm going to put this here. So that I no longer need to just say side.visit every time. And I'll leave it here just for an example. And I'll just say no longer needed because we do this in the before each. And then I'll get rid of it in these other ones. So that we have a bit of a reference there as we look back at the code later. And we see that our tests are still passing. So the last thing I want to do is let's check this button and let's make sure that the count is 0. So we're going to do it should have a button and count is 0. And we're going to do side.get button, and there's only one button, so that makes life easy. And let's do should contain, and we'll say count is 0. And let's see if this works or if there's anything that we have to debug here. And so lo and behold, we find the button and we check that the count is 0, which is awesome. So now let's write a test to confirm that clicking on the button works. And let's put it in a new describe block. And we'll say test clicking button. And we might only need one test here. I am going to need to write a new before each because this is a new describe block. So we'll do side.visit and go to our homepage. And we'll say it when clicking button count should increase from 0 to 1. And let's say clicking button for the first time, the count should increase from 0 to 1. So I'm going to get that button. And I'm going to call Cypress's click method. And Cypress does have a pretty good reference for all of the different sort of actions that we can take here. They call it actionability. I'll drop this in our Zoom chat if someone can share this link in Slack as well. But here we can see click, double click, right click, type, clear, check, uncheck, right? So all the really useful things that we could do, as well as some other things around like visibility and animations and other stuff. But this is a really good link to have as well. So we're going to click on the button. And now let's get the button again and check that its value has updated to 1. And let's run our test in Cypress. And we see here, we visit the home page. I get the button. I click on it. And the count is now 1. Now, when I'm testing that, and let's test just for completion's sake, that when I click on it twice, the count is increased to 2. So remember, each test is going to be separate. And because I have this before each, the home page gets reloaded each time. So this is my first button click. And I need another click to have my second click. And I'm going to leave count as 1 so that the test will fail. And we'll give Cypress a couple seconds and we'll watch it fail. And indeed here we see it fails. Assertion error, we expected it to contain count as 1, but indeed it does not. And if we look over here, we see count as 2. So that's a good failure. That's always a good way to make sure my test is behaving correctly, is to make sure it fails correctly. And now when we run it, we've got it working for count as 2. And I just want to pause here and see what questions folks have, or what people are curious about. And do you guys feel like we're starting to get a little bit more of a handle on writing Cypress tests? Chris, yes, sir.
I was curious, is this mostly for all our, I guess, HTML elements versus like, will we be testing like our hooks or prompts or anything like that?
That's a great question. So if I wanted to test like a hook, or if I wanted to test like sort of this function, that would be what's called a component test or a unit test. So that'd be something else. All of these, indeed, the way to think about it is these are end-to-end tests, right? Because the way that the test works is I'm actually simulating exactly what a user would do when they interact with my app, which is clicking a button, right? In order to do that, I need to be able to interact with the HTML in the browser. And so that's why we're doing it that way. Does that help answer your question? Yeah, great question. Thank you. Tom, yes, sir.
When testing the amount of clicks, would you explicitly have to type in that same command for the amount of clicks that you want, or is there like some sort of like loop or something else that you can utilize to get an X amount of clicks versus just retyping it?
You could totally put this in a for loop or something if you wanted to.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. If I wanted to click like 10 times or whatever, at that point, I probably would put in a loop. But for 2 or 3, it's pretty easy to just do this. Yeah, good question. All right, why don't we see one more thing, which is going to involve some Pokemon data, and then we can call it a day. So what we're going to look at now is what's called a stub. And let's see where I have this in the Cypress docs. There we go. So there are different terms for these things. You'll hear stubs or spies. With PyTest, it was called monkey patch. But basically, the job is we need to sort of like fake running a function and modify it and give us control. Because what I want to do is I want to fake making an API call to the Poke API. So let me go ahead and write out some code, and then we'll write a test for this and talk through it. So let me go over here to my app, and we're going to write a little bit of code here, and we're going to keep it pretty simple. But in fact, let me go ahead and install Axios before I forget. And while Axios is installing, I'm going to write a get Pokemon function. And it's just going to get a Pokemon by name. And Axios should be installed now. And I'm going to run the dev server again before I forget. And now I should be able to import Axios from Axios. And we're just going to do response equals Axios dot get. And in here, we're going to put HTTP, and pokeapi.co/ I think it's API. And let's double check over here the URL version, API/v2/Pokemon/ name. Right. And what I'm going to then do is I'm going to actually use a use effect. And I need to do a little more work here. I apologize. This needs to be an async function. We need a try and a catch. Right, so let's put that there, and let's just console log response.data.name for now. And I need an await right here. And I need a catch, an error. Arnold, yes, sir. I saw you had a question.
No, that was my question. The wait one.
Oh, thank you. Yep, I just had to play a little catch up with myself. And I'm going to just call it in here, but I'm going to use this dependency array of the use effect right here. And remember what this does is if the dependency array is empty, then this will fire once, which happens after the component has rendered for the first time. So what should happen is I'm getting Pikachu. And let's in fact, let's do this twice. And let's get Ditto. And let's see if this works. So I'm going to hop over here to my app and go to the console log. And it would certainly help if I remembered to import the use effect hook. And now if we clear the console and refresh the page, we see error, bad request, request failed with status code 404. And I suspect that's because I forgot the S here in HTTPS for the Poke API.
I
Let's
think
see.
I think you left off the V2 from the
Oh,
URL.
yeah. I totally did leave out the V2. Thank you. The dangers of typing out what I really should be copying and pasting. And now we see Ditto and Pikachu. Though, interestingly, note that even though I'm calling Pikachu first and Ditto second, we see Ditto printed first and Pikachu printed second. And that's because, remember, these are both like asynchronous calls. So I would have to maybe wrap these in a try, catch, and another async function to control their order. Or if I wanted to, I could use another use effect. And let's just have the first use effect called Pikachu and the second one called Ditto. And let me just get rid of some extra parentheses here. And I'm a little surprised by that. I guess that's actually not working the way I wanted. So I'm not going to worry about the two use effects right now. The main thing is we're grabbing our two Pokemon. And once I do, I want to render them to the screen and do it really simply. So I am going to make a components directory. And then inside here, I am going to make a Poke card. And we're going to keep it really, really simple. And it's just going to take in the Pokemon name and the Pokemon image URL. And we're going to return a div, and we'll put a class name on there, and we'll call it PokeCard. And I'll add a little bit of CSS in just a minute. And we'll do an H2 with the Pokemon's name. And we'll do an image where the image will be the Pokemon image URL. And that's really it. And I think I will go into app.css and we'll make up here a PokeCard class. And we'll make it really simple. We'll make it have a border of 4 pixels, solid black. We'll make it have padding of 4 pixels, how about 8 pixels all around, and margin of 8 pixels all around. And now over here in app.jsx, I think what I'll do here is once I've gotten my Pokemon, I want to create a new Poke card. Right, so I'm going to want to create the Poke card. But then I need to add the Poke card somehow to the DOM. And to do that, I'm going to need some sort of list or array. So we'll call this Pokemons and set Pokemons. And this will hold my Pokemon data. And it's going to start out as an empty array. And so now I have this React state, but I need to go through and turn all those Pokemons into Pokemon. And so I think what we'll do is we'll do it just right here. And we'll just put everything in a div just to kind of keep it organized. And let's do if the Pokemons have at least one thing in them. Though actually, I don't even need to do this for an array, because if an array is empty, map simply won't iterate through it. And we'll render our Poke card and we'll say name equals, and we'll call this Poke data. Poke data dot name, and the image URL will be Poke data dot image URL. And I need to add a closing div. Or let's see here. We are missing unterminated regular expression. I'm probably missing. Oh, Arnold, yes, sir.
I think you're missing another closing bracket.
Yes, there we go. Thank you so much. I was, in fact, yep, I got confused. That's always. There we go. And in fact, now the formatting works. Thank you. And if we hop to our site, we see it's rendering. And no Pokemon is in there yet, but that's going to be our next step. And so up here, right, I'm not adding the Pokemon to the DOM, but I'm adding it to my component state. And I don't need to create the Poke card. I just need to add the Pokemon data. So let's just do set Pokemons. And we're going to destructure the existing, or do a spread on the existing Pokemon's array. So we're going to make a copy of existing array, and then we're going to add to it. And I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm not even going to throw the whole Pokemon object in there. I'm just going to throw in the two things that I care about. And add new Pokemon to array. So fingers crossed, this will update our Pokemon state. And we see that we're partially working here, though we're running into a couple issues. I forgot that we need to add the key prop because React doesn't like it when I don't do that. So let's grab the index and use that as the key. But it looks like there's a couple other issues here to resolve.
Index type.
Yeah, you spelled index wrong.
Oh, I spelled index wrong. That would be the error. Thank you, guys. So we see Ditto's in here. Pikachu's not. Let's tackle that in a second. First, it looks like I'm not passing in an image. The image URL isn't doing what it should. So let's go here to the Poke card and let's do a little debugging. And let's just throw in Poke card so I know what's going on. And then let's console.log, let's console.log name, and let's console.log image URL. And as I'm typing this, I think I've figured out my problem. And it was one of the easiest kind of errors to make, and also the easiest kind to fix. If I look at how I'm grabbing this from the Poke data, image URL does not exist. And I did it right here as well, right? I got a little too zeroed in on what I was doing. I need to look through the Pokemon data object, which stores its image URLs in the sprites object. And inside sprites, I think it's front default. And if we change this, now we see Ditto showing up as expected. Though note that I'm running into some issues here. Although like I'm calling this twice, we don't seem to be seeing both of the Pokemons show up, even though I'm actually making the two API calls. Right? If we search for the Poke API, and I clear this and refresh, we make the two calls, we get Pikachu and Ditto, but what's happening now is what's called a race condition, where the issue may be I might not be setting my Pokemons correctly. It's either that or something related to the use effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to console log dot here, and we're going to say Pokemons is, and we'll print out what's in there. And that will help us identify where this problem is. And so now if I save the code and have it run again, we see that we got Pikachu. We added it to a Pokemon's card. And this is coming from the Pokemon card here. And it doesn't look like Ditto got added to Pokemons. So something is not happening right over here. And I suspect the issue is around this use effect. And we'll see what happens if we do it this way. No, so my apologies. It looks like some sort of overwriting must be happening here. Because the Pokemon's length is staying at 0. And it's not increasing. Let's try one more console log, and then I may have to pause it. So, and if nothing else, this does point out, like we've been talking about why we need promises and asynchronous operations and stuff. And this is a good example of those issues in action. Like we can see that we're rendering once, but we're not really putting the other Pokemon into our Pokemon's array. Tom, yes, sir.
Would it work better if we turned it into like a list and iterated through it so it was forced to slow down? Or use another method. I mean, it would get too complicated, but we could also use like next and yield if it was a long list or.
Yeah, yeah. I think in some ways, I was actually hoping like the use effect by having these two would manage the issue for me. So I was kind of expecting, and I think the issue, I was expecting that this would kind of like then trigger a state change. But the issue I think we're running into is these only fire when the component mounts for the very first time. So like one of these fires, but the other doesn't. I think if we can get this to work, I think this is where an async function actually would really come in helpful. So let's see if this and use effect might not. Yeah, it doesn't like us doing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to write get all pokey, and it's going to be an async function, and it's going to be a wrapper, and we're going to have a try catch block in there. And I probably should have just done it this way to begin with. And then we're going to do both of our get Pokemon calls in here, but we're going to do await. And I think this will solve it. Because this is exactly the kind of thing that async and await and promises are meant to solve, right? Because now this forces the JavaScript to wait for this to finish before going to here, and it forces it to wait for that to finish. And let's see if that resolves the issue. So interesting. Oh, it would certainly help if I called this function. Just getting a little lost in the sauce. And I saw a hand up. Is that what you were going to say?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I apologize, guys. It looks like I'm still running into an issue here. And I think, yeah, there are other ways to solve this. Like we could have like a watcher on the use effect. I apologize because I got a little lost in the sauce on this one, and I might need to pause it here. Because we have one Pokemon rendering just fine. The second one, I need to, I think, clean up my code to get it to work. So I do apologize about that. And let's see if we refresh here now. It's just the one. So I think let me at least show a little bit of what I wanted to with the spy, and then we can call it a day. And I'll try to clean up this code and get it working and push it up later. So the challenge here, and I'm kind of running into some of these real world challenges, but if I'm going to write a test for this, I need to tell my test to wait. And I also, frankly, I need to really fake this data. Like, cause I might not actually want to make this API call. So in my describe block, let's say test fetching Pokemon. And let's actually write out like a couple tests here progressively. Let's test that Pikachu loads on page load. And we'll do side.visit. And now we'll do side.get. And because this Pokemon is in a PokeCard container, we'll do get PokeCard. And for the moment, there's only one, so this will work okay. But we'll do EQ0 just to remind us that we're getting the first one. And it should contain, and actually, let's go inside here and let's grab the H2 element. And it should contain Pikachu. And let's just, let's grab the image element in there. And I'm going to actually scroll up to my other code to use this as a reference. And it should, right, have attribute source and then should contain. So we're going to do should have attribute source and it should contain, and I'm just going to go into here and I'm going to grab this source URL. And paste that in. Now we're actually going to run into a bit of an issue when we run this test. So if I go to all of my tests, so we're running into a bit of an issue here. And we see this timed out. We see that this should have something in it, but we see Pikachu showing up here. And it's a little hard to interpret here, like what the problem is. Though it actually looks like it's getting the data. So this actually is a separate problem. It looks like I may have a typo in. So there were two problems here. One is I had a typo in my code. The other problem though, that we actually don't see, but what if the Poke API server takes a really long time to respond? And what if we get a timeout? And I'm not sure if I can simulate that here. We might not see that happen. But what you usually have to do when you're writing tests for things that are doing asynchronous operations is once you visit a page, you have to wait. So let's have it wait 3 seconds or 3,000 milliseconds. So we're waiting to make sure there is enough time to fetch data from the Poke API. And so this is sort of like my safety measure. And let's see, I think I just have a typo here. And this probably shouldn't be a string. And there we go. Now that's working. And we see kind of running through those tests. We see it waiting those 3,000 seconds, and then it's checking to see that it exists. So that's one thing to bear in mind with this. So the other way to write this kind of test is to fake it. So here we're testing that we would make the correct API call and handle response data correctly. So I would do one or the other. And if I'm faking it, the first thing I have to do is I have to make a mock response object. And there's a lot of things I would need to put in here, but I only need to care about the data property and the name property, which has Pikachu. And then I need sprites. And then sprites needs to have a front default property. And that is going to be this string right here. So if I was working with more data from here, I might have to fake more of the response object. But just to start with that, this is actually a pretty good start. And then we have to use what's called an interceptor. Excuse me. And so what we're going to do now is, as it says here, we're stubbing and intercepting HTTP requests and responses. So I'm telling Cypress, listen for a GET request that is going to this URL for our Pokemon, and let me paste it in. And this was where I wanted to go, and my apologies for getting a little lost in the sauce with the multiple Pokemon. I was hoping to kind of demonstrate breaking down into that a bit. And now we need to basically, so intercept is taking 3 arguments. What kind of HTTP requests to look for? What route or URL to look for that request on? And now we're going to give it a fake response object. And we're also going to tell it the name of our JavaScript method that's being called, that this is going to happen from. And so now I should be able to take these same steps. And I shouldn't need the dot wait, though it certainly won't hurt to have it. I think I have a typo here in my code, so let me see if I can't fix this. So I see a couple red squigglies. Oh, it just wants a closing comma. And no, it looks like I might have a slightly more significant typo. Let's see if we can't find it. So that closes sprites. That closes data. That closes the object. So I think we'll see. I might have a typo somewhere because I'm seeing some red squigglies where I don't expect. But let's see where we can go with this code. Okay, and we're almost there. It looks like maybe I have a closing parentheses in my code somewhere where I shouldn't. Yep. And so that was that issue. And if we go and we look at these tests, let's see here. So it looks like we got partway through. We faked the get pokey. But now we're running into an assertion error here. And yeah, I apologize, guys. I may have to debug this one offline, especially because I know we're hitting noon here. But this example with the intercept is a more advanced example of what we'll see. And here we can in fact see in the console log a lot of information from Cypress. And we see sort of the request headers. We can look at the response body, and we see data, sprites, front default. So we're indeed successfully faking this request and response. It looks like the error might be coming from somewhere else in the code. So I might have to track this one down a bit to see what the issue is. So I think this is the right structure here because we have response, data, name, and sprites. And if we look in our code with how we're working with it, we have a response object data.name and then sprites and front default. So I suspect my issue is somewhere here with how I am using it or then calling get pokey. So I may need to debug this one a bit more, guys. My apologies. Or the issue actually might be here with this URL. If I simplify this a bit, let's see what happens if I just get rid of this, since we're only calling one Pokemon right now anyway, and we say Pikachu. And let's see if that maybe resolves the issue with the tests. Yeah, so it looks like we're still running into an issue here that I'll try and debug offline. So my apologies about that. Let's wrap here though, so we can't break for lunch. Let me just kind of review and then we'll also take a look at the assignments. So we covered a lot of ground here and we got into some more complex things, but to kind of just review the fundamentals of working with Cypress, we saw that we can use first or this .eq sub-0 if I'm getting something where there's multiples of them, like multiple links, or there's multiple image assets inside a link. And then I can check see the different attributes that that HTML element has and check their values. Right. And then we also saw how I can use before each to run some code before each of these tests rather than having to put this inside each individual test. And I can use all of Cypress's nice operations for interacting with the DOM, like click, and then check values of things to make sure that interacting with the page works correctly. And we were able to see how to test making a real API call in an end-to-end test. We know we need to wait a little bit when the page is loading in case the API request takes longer. But then again, we can search inside the page to see that the data we expect to see gets rendered on the screen. And we got partway through faking an API call. We built a mock response. We built an interceptor that was basically creating a mock API request. But then I think we were running into an issue somewhere here with how the interceptor gets used. And that one I'll have to debug offline, but we can at least sort of see an example of the technique. So those are really the main things with Cypress. And I just want to pause here and see what questions folks have or what people might be curious about with everything that we've kind of covered and run through today, from installing and setting up Cypress, right? Adding it as a script to package.json to either run individual tests from the command line or run Cypress interactively, like we've been doing here. And then actually with the interactive Cypress app running in the browser, running all of our various tests. So what's on people's minds, or what do people have questions about, or that we're curious about? Yes, sir.
Would we run any of these tests through the command line? I don't think we saw that. We only saw the interactive fashion, I believe.
Yeah, we absolutely can run them through the command line. And let me just go ahead and demo that. So I need to make sure I have my Vite dev server running, because the command line is still going to interact with that. So I've got to have dev server running, and then in another console, and I've just killed the sort of open Cypress. I can use this run command. And it needs an argument, right? And so I need to give it, I need to check, but I believe it's the path. It's either the path to the file or the test name. And let me actually double check that really quick. And okay, it's indeed the name to the file. So I would do run, and inside my project, all the tests are living in the Cypress directory. So Cypress /e2e/ and if we keep going inside here, if I wanted to maybe run all the tests in the 0 my tests directory, let's see if that works. Yep. And so here we can see that I'm running all the tests in a particular directory. And in fact, it looks like it generated a screenshot for me on air, which actually is not what I want. If I had multiple test files inside an individual directory, I would add the name of the file that I want to run. And we can see here, oh good, it's not generating screenshots. Oh, it looks like it is. So when we run it from the command line and there's an error, it generates a screenshot, which is maybe good or bad depending on what you want, but could also be disabled in the Cypress config. Yeah, Tom, thank you for the reminder on that. So we can use this side run command to run a test from the command line, and then we give it the path to the directory with our tests that we want to run, or an individual file. So if I wanted to run all my end-to-end tests, I should be able to do it like that. And I think this will actually then run. Yep, so this is then going to run all of those end-to-end tests. What other questions do folks have, or what else are people curious about? Rick, yes, sir.
All right, there we go. I know you're getting kind of like lost in the sauce, so I can. It's a question I had about React and Tailwind, but yeah, I can ask it at a later time if you're kind of lost in the sauce right now.
Yeah, let me just wrap up. Let's just wrap up and then let me come back to it. Thank you, I appreciate it. Cool. All right, let me stop the recording, guys. And I'll push up, I think, a working example of the intercept later. And then let's talk through our assignments.